From Interfaith Alliance, this is State of Belief Radio. I'm your host, Reverend Welton Gaddy. It's been a long, long year at the intersection of religion, government, and politics. But something we do annually here at State of Belief Radio is pause to take a look back and weigh which religion news stories had the most impact on us. We're fortunate again this year to be able to ask Kevin Eckstrom to come on our show. He usually gladly does that, as he has this time. Kevin is editor-in-chief at Religion News Service. Kevin, welcome back to State of Belief Radio.
Always fun to be here.
Now, I got to be up front with you. One danger, but also one good thing about doing this show is we keep an archive. And so I went back to last year's Religion News Roundup, on which you were the guest, and I heard you call 2011 the year of taking it to the streets. From the Arab Spring to Occupy Wall Street, we were talking about a lot of people around the world pushing back against real or perceived oppression. When you look at the top stories now for 2012, what kind of theme comes to mind?
Well, there's the obvious one, and then there's the more, what I think, interesting one. And the obvious one is the election. 2012 was all about the race for the White House. It kind of dominated everything. And everything was sort of tied to the election. And, we could spend hours, picking it apart and what worked and what didn't work. And I'm happy to do that. But I think that one's sort of obvious. Mm-hmm. I think the more interesting one is kind of the things that we saw this year that kind of indicated fairly dramatic social change on a number of different levels. One of the most fascinating trends that emerged this year, and that's going to have some legs going well beyond 2013, was figures that showed that 1 in 5 Americans now don't have a religious affiliation. Mm-hmm. They're called the nuns. They're either an atheist or a secularist or just a really good person, but they don't attend a church or synagogue or mosque. And what's really interesting is that 90% of them don't really have an interest. They're not looking. They're not seekers. Seekers were all the rage a couple years ago. These people have either not started or given up on it. And I think that trend has a lot of implications for religious America to think about and to wrestle with. Some people think it's a great thing. Some people think that it's a cause of concern to establish churches, and some people think it's going to change the way we do religion and politics. And I think all of that is true. But it really changes the notion of America as a Christian country, certainly, but also as a religious country. I mean, we're still certainly religious. 80% of us have some sort of affiliation. But the growth among all religions is not in the established churches. It's not among evangelicals or Catholics or mainline churches. It's among the nuns, the people who just don't want to have a religion.
And Kevin, what's interesting to me is there has been a lot of change within a number of religious denominations this year. That's probably on your list, but what I wonder is whether it is the right change at this moment, because I happen to think that the nuns are actually making a new context that, if ignored by religious denominations, will be to their detriment.
That's right. I mean, if churches wrestle all the time with how do we get people in the doors, and once they're here, how do we keep them? And what these surveys, and there were several actually, what they're showing us is that a lot of people don't even want to come to your doors. You might never get them. And if you want to reach them, they are largely going to be put off by religiosity, by preachiness, by taking religion into the public square in an inappropriate way. They don't want to have fights about abortion and same-sex marriage and God in schools. They have no interest in it. And I think what we saw in the election and in certain races was that politicians who got too preachy or who adopted a stance that was seen as too strident, particularly on questions of rape and abortion, they didn't do very well. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is a bit of a canary in the coal mine here. Politicians who insist on dragging religion into the public square are going to be met with an increasingly hostile response, mm-hmm. or maybe not even hostile, but ambivalent response. These people, the nuns, the surveys indicate, they're not hostile towards religion per se. Like, if you want to go to church, that's fine, but don't bring it into my life.
Yeah.
And that's a change for politics, but it's also a change for a lot of churches.
We saw a lot of internal conflict within the Catholic Church this year. And I've got to respell nuns. The right. Nuns, N-U-N-S, the nuns on the bus, made headlines with their push for social justice. Is there going to be a lasting impact to the conflicts that we've seen this year within the Catholic Church?
Well, yes, and I think we should also say that when we're talking about the nuns, N-U-N-S, there's really two different stories playing out here. One is sort of the social justice nuns who were out campaigning against Paul Ryan's budget and saying, we need to protect the poor, and they did it in a more visible public way than they probably have done it in recent years, and they were very successful at it. I think. And their message seemed to resonate with people. The consensus that came out of the election was that if we have to make cuts in the budget, that's fine, but we're not going to do it on the backs of programs that help the poor, and we're certainly not going to do it in ways so that millionaires can keep their tax cuts. And that's what the nuns were saying. And so I think they were remarkably successful. They found their voice on this issue this year, and I think they're going to continue to have an impact there. The other story, though, with the nuns was the crackdown that came from the Vatican when the Vatican basically accused them of being too socially liberal, spending too much time on social justice and not enough on abortion and homosexuality. And the really interesting part of all that was that the nuns were able to really draw large support from rank-and-file Catholics. Catholics who stood outside of churches with signs saying, "We love our sisters," and "Honk if you love a nun," and telling the Vatican to step back. You're picking the wrong fight with the wrong group of ladies here. Yeah. And that's something that you hadn't seen in a while. And so I think to the degree that the nuns are under investigation or are seen to be being picked on, the church is going to have a hard time with that.
What religion stories or religion headlines have most impacted the secular world this year, in your opinion?
I think one of the big ones. It's not a religion story per se, but it's certainly a religious issue. 2012 was a huge year in terms of gay rights, specifically on the question of gay marriage. Mm-hmm. We had 4 states on Election Day that voted to approve it, essentially, and one in North Carolina back in May that voted to ban it. But it's the first time that the ballot box has actually been a win for the gay side. And even more than all of that, as significant as all that is, the number that really jumped out at me this year was a Gallup poll from May, which found that 54% of Americans now see homosexual relations as morally acceptable. It's the first time that a majority has ever said that. Mm-hmm. And increasing majorities of people are okay with the idea of gay marriage. So to the extent that churches and religious groups are fighting this, at least demographically, they seem to be on the wrong side. Now, I'm not saying that they're wrong or that they're ultimately going to lose, mm-hmm. but the trend lines are pretty clear. For the under 30 set, this is a non-issue. Mm-hmm. And other surveys indicate that for young people, churches that are seen as anti-gay are a turnoff, and they don't want to go to those kinds of places because they have friends, they have family, they have teachers who are gay, and they don't see a problem with it. So I think 2012 set the stage for 2013, and that's when the Supreme Court is going to get involved. And it's not entirely clear, how they're going to rule, because it never is. But the justices have a couple of different options in terms of how wide a ruling they want to do. They can make it a smaller one. They could make it a broad-based one. They could even come out and say that there's a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. Mm-hmm. So it's not clear how far they're going to go. But 2013, I think, is going to be as important to this issue as 2012 was.
I'm really glad you brought that up. And I want to twist the question that prompted that and ask it another way. I've always liked asking you about religion news, or what gets characterized as religion news, and how important that is in your work, and then whether or not the mainstream media have covered that news adequately. So what stories deserved more attention than they got?
Well, the trickiest one, but probably the one that I would have liked to have seen teased out a little bit more, gets back to Mitt Romney and kind of Mormon theology. We heard a lot about how evangelicals are suspicious about Mormons, and they don't really like them very much, but it never really, in my view anyway, got beneath the surface there. What is it about Mormon theology that is problematic for other Christians? What exactly do Mormons believe, and why? And, part of the Mormon mystique, if you will, is some of these, very unorthodox beliefs. And one of them being that, the Garden of Eden was once in Missouri, and Jesus might return there someday. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that's a fairly minor Mormon belief, but yet it's there. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of mainstream media were scared off by that, and maybe understandably so. But I think, there's a danger in dwelling too much on a candidate's faith. You don't need me to tell you that. But because Mitt Romney's identity was so wrapped up in his Mormonism and his life and his career, I think, there could have been more exploration about what Mormons believe, even if it's not necessarily what he believes.
Kevin, can you list maybe the top 5 religion news stories of the year as ranked by Religion News Service?
Well, this year we did something a little different. We didn't pick a top 10 list, although we did do kind of top 10 stories that we thought were significant. So, for example, the gun shootings in Connecticut, but not just Connecticut, but also Aurora, Colorado, and the Sikh temple in Wisconsin. I think that is going to be a story that is going to take us into next year, and there's probably going to be some action about that. Of course, we had the nuns, the secularists that we talked about, the Catholic nuns, the other nuns, Mitt Romney's Mormon moment, gay rights, the fight between the Catholic bishops and evangelicals and the Obama White House over contraception, I think was fascinating and still ongoing. And then, of course, the Catholic Church's continuing wrestling with clergy sex abuse. What was significant on that this year is, one, it marks the 10-year anniversary since all of this exploded in 2002 in Boston, but we also had 2 criminal convictions, the highest level criminal convictions, and really the first 2 of church officials, one bishop and one he was a Monsignor, but he was in charge of the clergy, who were convicted for not doing enough, for not reporting this person, a suspect, to the police, and also for shuffling priests who were known to have problems from one church to another. So those are sort of the top stories. I don't know that they're in a list of priority necessarily, but that's kind of what came out at the top of the list.
When you look at all of those stories, in addition to the hundreds of others that you reported on this year, as a result of that, do you think that in the culture wars, we are more entrenched in our divisions, or do you see any signs of building bridges?
Well, I'm sort of a glass half full, half empty on this. I guess I kind of want to have it both ways. I think out of the election, there seemed to be a message of, you know what, we don't agree. Mm-hmm. And chances are we're not going to agree. But we have some pretty major problems as a country, particularly financial, and we need to do something. And I think the voters seem to be fairly clear that they want something to happen. And we're seeing now in Washington, just the difficulty of getting us to stop short of going over the fiscal cliff. So it's not going to be easy. And I don't know how much has really changed, but there seems to be a popular sentiment for Congress and also maybe the White House to stop the shenanigans and get back to work and actually do something. Yeah. And I think you're also seeing that in the gun debate after the Connecticut shootings. People can have their various disagreements on gun rights and the Second Amendment and all of that, but there seems to be a consensus that something has gotten out of hand and that there has to be room for reasonable restrictions that are going to prevent first graders from getting gunned down in their class. So I think, there is this sentiment that it's time to put the foolishness aside and do something. Mm-hmm. Whether or not Washington can break its bad habits and actually do that, we're going to have to wait till 2013 to see.
I would always like to end this show, and that's true this year, on a positive note. Think about what was the top good news religion story of 2012. We got to be positive, even if we have to make ourselves be positive.
Well, I suppose the Pope joining Twitter probably doesn't really count. One of the this also falls into my category of most underreported story, perhaps. Okay. When the U.S. consulate in Libya was attacked and we lost 4 diplomats, there was this stupid movie, anti-Islam movie that was blamed for it. Turns out probably wasn't what sparked it. But anyway, this movie got a lot of attention. And not too long after, President Obama delivered an address that I think probably didn't get as much attention as it maybe should have, but I thought it was the most significant religion speech that he has given in his term as president so far. But he basically called for a new understanding of how religions need to get along in the world. And if anything else, this kooky video showed us, how explosive the situation can be and how interconnected we really are. And President Obama basically said, you know what, if we're going to get along, we need to actually respect another person's religion, even when we disagree with it. And if you're going to call out the faults of other religions, you have to look inward and call out the faults in your own as well. Fascinating speech. I think it really, I think it painted a new picture of what religion in public life and in global life can be. Mm-hmm. And we'll sort of see what the legs are going forward, but that would sort of be my pick for most interesting and hopefully positive story.
And it's a good model for all of us involved in a pluralistic society.
That's right.
I've been speaking with Kevin Eckstrom. Editor-in-Chief for Religion News Service, an invaluable resource for any of us concerned with the role religion plays in our daily lives and in the life of our nation. Visit the website, bookmark it, keep going back to it. Despite how loaded a subject religion is in our culture, you will find RNS consistently covers it in a way that is secular, objective, and comprehensive. The address is www.religionnews.com. Kevin, thank you for being with us on this important news roundup once more here on State of Belief Radio.
Thank you very much.